Hi everyone, I'm Josh, and today I'm going to be talking to you, or doing with you, the nonfiction journey tag. This was kind of a last second thing. Honestly, the sun is setting and you may see the light dim as I'm recording, but I wanted something this week. I've just been busy, haven't had a chance to make anything. And I remembered that I saw this wonderful tag from Hannah's book, and I thought it'd be a nice thing to discuss, not too time consuming. So let's just go through these different questions and we can think about my relationship and my journey with nonfiction since it is Nonfiction November. Question one: what was your first experience reading nonfiction? And this one, honestly, his first few really, I don't have a good memory of. Like, I don't remember well. I remember my earliest books, the kid, they were all fiction, they were all kids' books. But when I thought about what my early books were, I really just went to Goodreads and looked at my oldest books that were listed, and they were what I thought they were, which was the ones that I read in high school, specifically for one teacher that I had in 10th grade, and then again for 12th grade for like AP Lit and AP Comp. Those books that I read with her were one about the nature of reading, which was fine, quite love. But before that, it was really just a really simple memoir, Tuesdays with Maury. And that's one I've actually talked about on my channel before. I remember one of my earliest tags, I think I mentioned this as a book that I loved. I've since reread it. I'll try to make sure I list both those videos below if you're interested. And realize as an adult, I don't quite vibe with it the same way. Like as a kid, I had a fundamentally different perspective on life, and it's changed. And I just don't quite like what they were selling in Tuesdays this morning. It's like a lot of it sort of feels sort of self-helpy and a little bit sort of empty platitudes, like just very low level. And sure, as a kid, it's like really invigorating, and it's like hearing these ideas for the first time, it was just so much, it was so great. So it was a good choice, I think, by my teacher at the time, because it got me excited about a book, a nonfiction book, for the first time that I can ever remember, and one that made a lasting impression, even if it's one that I didn't really like again when I was 30 years old. But people change, and that's a good thing. The other book that I remember reading with her was How to Read Literature Like a Professor. I have not revisited that. I remember it was a hard book. I didn't love it, but it was like for AP Lit, so it is that. That said, I have since come to love one, Memoirs, which is a question, spoilers later on, and two, books about reading in general. I think I do more of the former than the latter, but we'll talk more about that as we get to the future questions. Moving on to number two: has the reading of a work of nonfiction ever brought tears to your eyes? And it's possible reading Tuesdays with Maury did that. Around that time, I think my first grandmother passed away. I don't remember that happening. I could see it in the time. I remember having a very emotional, visceral reaction. More recent would have been several years ago when I read Mortality by, I forget the author's name, but of course I put the cover up, and it was basically about his memoir, but also talking about death and how he processed it. And this was so soon after my second grandmother died, and I love both of them, but honestly I was closer with my second grandmother, so that was even more intense, not to mention how my life philosophy had changed. But it was just such a strong set of feelings that were coming from that book, and it still look back on it as one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. Mortality is a perfect intersection of, I think, both personal and professional, meaning it is a book about how we think about death from a surgeon's perspective, but also it's his own experience, and it's integrated in just the right way to make it really, really work in a way that I really care about, beyond just my ability to empathize with a human being. Number three: are there any people who have played a significant role in your nonfiction journey? And before I get into book two, which really is the biggest one, I feel like, I have to mention my high school teacher. I feel like I shouldn't mention her name, but again, 10th grade, and honestly, she was a big impactor on my reading in general. I loved all my English teachers, but to be honest, like, she was my favorite. I don't think they watch my channel. They do. I'm sorry, I loved you all, but I connected with her a bit more, I think, I did in a way I didn't with the others, but also I just have such strong memories of reading, having such fun reading different books in her class. And Tuesdays with Maury is just an example of that. But even with things like How to Read Literature Like a Professor, that was a book where I didn't quite much enjoy reading it, but I enjoyed the engagement. I enjoyed the act of trying to understand it and trying to get what she was trying to give from it. Those were just two parts of like a much bigger connection that I have with her. But in my mind, if I think of my earliest situation. She is my first experience. And the person who really inspired majorly my love of reading in general, or rather, not inspired, but rather fostered it. Like, it was already there, but those are the formidable years where one's love of reading can go away, or it can sort of begin to flourish. That said, it wouldn't really flourish until I was exposed to BookTube, where there was just that raw excitement of reading in general. But then I got exposed to people who I could relate to a bit more, reading things that I liked more, and even got me to consider things that I hadn't already. Not to say I wasn't reading nonfiction, but seeing channels like A Book Olive being a major one. Obviously, we all know her, running Nonfiction November. And for me, the other one probably would be Pam from A History Shelf, I think is what it is. And I haven't kept up with her channel quite as much, but I think what pulled me to her was I do love history, and I love learning about the past, which wasn't something I always loved. So we'll leave it at that for now. I think that transitions well into the next question. Do you enjoy documentaries? And do I have a favorite? Is there a subject you'd like to see discussed on film? That is, what should Ken Burns film next? And I hate to say it, I don't actually love documentaries. I love reading about history and politics especially, so I suppose there are some that I do enjoy, but there's something about it, like when I'm watching something, I kind of want to see it more brought to life in a fictional manner, which is ironic because I don't like the same in book. I'd rather read a nonfiction book about history than a fictionalized telling of that, which is, I guess, it's an interesting dichotomy to feel that way about film in here. That said, when I do watch documentaries, I think my favorites in my mind are going to be nonfiction. Are going to be science ones. There's one that I remember getting so excited about when I was like in my 20s, early 20s. It was Fabric of the Cosmos, which I eventually did read, and that was by, the book was by, and this show was narrated by Brian Greene, and that would honestly foster so much of my love of cosmology. And I've read several of his books, several other books as well. I think he's one of the few authors from my 20s who I feel like I stand by my love of. And so if I had to pick a documentaries, it would be science in general. I mean, now I think about it, Cosmos, that's peak documentary right there. And in the same way, Fabric of the Cosmos, that was both a book and a documentary, and I'm not sure which came first. I feel like it was definitely the book that came first. Either way, that was Carl Sagan, and that's actually one of my top books of all time. I love Fabric of the Cosmos, the book, but it didn't come at the right time in my life for it to be like an all-time favorite, while Cosmos did. Now, I should say that Cosmos, both the show and the book, came after Fabric of the Cosmos, the documentary. While I love both of those, and that did come first, the Fabric of the Cosmos was one piece of a larger puzzle that sort of fed into my love of space and space science, and eventually pushed me into planetary science. While I love it for being a part of that larger puzzle, when I look at Cosmos, it feels like a more pivotal part. I didn't leave it wanting to be what Carl Sagan was, but it left such an impression that when I think about what kind of scientist I want to be, it's Carl Sagan. It's not Brian Greene. It's not an insult. It's just it's what I feel, and that's where that sort of inspiration comes from when it comes to Cosmos versus Fabric of the Cosmos. So I guess I do like documentaries, just usually they're science, but even then I don't seek out science documentaries like I used to. Science books, yes, and history books, yes. And that's not to say I'm not interested in history documentaries in general. We talk about Ken Burns, what he should do. Like, it's the kind of question I would like to hear other people answer, because I feel like I could easily get excited about ideas that others would promote, would suggest in this situation. But yeah, really, science is where I've had the strongest feelings in documentaries. Number 5, have you read a biography about or memoir of a person with whom you identify? And I would say biography/memoirs are a major part of what I read in nonfiction, one of the biggest parts. Part of that is because there's so much overlap in, pop culture, history, just significant figures in history in general. Like, there's just so much overlap of those three things that I like, so that I can sort of satiate my need for history with a biography. That said, the one that comes to mind for this is going to be We've Always Been Here by Samar Habib, and this was the winner of the 2020, I think, Canada Reads competition. She is I believe, a Pakistani immigrant to Canada. It's about her experience as a queer woman in Islam rather. We have very different viewpoints on religion and very different outcomes, but that sort of relationship with religion and that journey of trying to understand one's sexuality as it intersects with a conflicting religion is one I can definitely empathize with and relate to. I did not come to the same conclusion as her, where she left feeling like she could make it compatible. Did not come to that conclusion. Granted, that's not why I left Christianity, but I also don't see the two as compatible either. Not inherently incompatible, but I'm just generally against it in general, beyond my sexuality. But there's a nuance there that I'm choosing not to get into. Okay, I recognize that. So number 6, 9 minutes until I have an appointment. Let's do this. Read aloud a short passage from a work of nonfiction. So I mentioned Carl Sagan. 3 of his books are my top 10 books of all time. So a major player in my life and in my love of reading. So I'm going to be reading from A Pale Blue Dot. If you know Carl Sagan, you definitely know this quote. So I don't know who I'm doing this for except for myself, considering you either heard this before or it's new to you and you probably don't have much interest because it's so mainstream. Anybody who has interest in it would have heard it by now. But let's talk about his discussion of Earth as a pale blue dot, an image taken from, I believe it was one of the Voyager missions, looking back from Earth, from Saturn, and interplaced with that will be a similar image taken from the Cassini mission. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest, but for us, it's different. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless visited by the inhabitants of the one corner of this pixel, of the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. Number 7, do any works of nonfiction intimidate you? Which ones and why? And yes, it's the academic ones. I feel like I do read academic works, and I talk about the level of academic nature of a book, like how academic it feels versus how easily it can be read. Obviously, like anybody else, I get intimidated by it. Like, part of it is the energy I have to put into a book only goes so far, and my fear is wasting my time, wasting your time if and when I talk about it, and just not giving investing my time into something, thinking I'm getting something from it, but really I'm doing more harm to myself than good because I'm not really taking away what I should, because I just don't have the energy to put into it. But yet there are books that still really intrigue me, and I feel like I should just find a better option. But there are books from major presses like Abraham Lincoln Alive, Volume 1 and 2. That shit's massive. But this audiobook for it just seems so tantalizing, the idea of learning that much about him. But I also think to myself, how there's no way I'm going to get through that without being bored as hell. And I don't know, why do I want to do it? Part of it is the fact that it is so academic, that it is just so massive. it feels like a personal accomplishment to want to do it. I feel like I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. But then there are other books too, like on my net reads, where they're also history about certain people, and I know they lean academic, and I'm terrified to read them for that reason. It's just a couple examples of things that make me afraid to read them. Big books in general don't bother me as long as those books are readable, accessible. Number 8, which tips would you give to people hesitant to read nonfiction? I would say there is such a huge breadth of nonfiction to read. It seems so unlikely there won't be something that you can't enjoy. There's a lot of nonfiction that is really just personal stories. Like there's nonfiction that integrates a personal story or integrates a nonfiction idea, and but they have such liberal freedom with where they take the story, the narrative, that it really, even though it's nonfiction, can still feel like a fiction book. Then there are books that are literally fictionalized, which is to say there's imagined dialogue around someone's memories. Like, I think Maya Angelou is a perfect example of this, another all-time favorite. I think that book, honestly, is one of the most pivotal experiences for a memoir, was just reading that and how immersive it felt. Like, naturally, when she's thinking about her childhood up to 12 or older, I can't imagine she remembers every conversation, let alone exact words. But she takes what she does remember and she crafts it into a coherent narrative that is, there's a word for it, I don't know what it is, but it's like a narrative, to a literal narrative, the way it reads like a fiction book. And while there's some natural freedom that comes with that type of format, it makes it really easy to get lost in it, despite it being nonfiction. So what I would say is just consider books that are framed in a way that are more accessible. Don't feel like you have to do it to learn. Like, there are books that I strive to read because I want to literally try to learn something, but that's not nonfiction. It's hardly nonfiction as a whole. It's just one of many of a plethora of books. I mean, fiction itself has a shit ton of academic works, so it's not as if that doesn't have its own slice of stuff. Naturally, if you either do or you don't want to read those. Same works for nonfiction. There's just so much to choose from. I think you're limiting yourself not to consider what might be there. And sometimes it's like, while I can empathize with a character in fiction, it's a different experience when I know that's a real person who has lived this out. That's especially true for memoirs, where knowing they're real adds a level of heaviness to it that makes it all the more compelling. That's a component that you just can't have in fiction. You can get lost in a story, you can believe it to an extent, but to know it actually happened, it's just very different in some cases. Finally, what are your favorite works of nonfiction? I have called them out, and I will go back to them. There is Carl Sagan's Cosmos, Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot, Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World, one I haven't mentioned. This is one that I feel like is fundamental. It really just talks about how we can use science and critical thinking as a way of understanding and interpreting the world. That is fundamental for anyone and everyone, in my opinion. Sadly, it's not taught in schools, even though I think it should be. And then, of course, Maya Angelou's I Know How a Caged Bird Sings. That one is such a beautiful and heartbreaking and powerful story, and it emphasizes what is possible in a memoir when it's done in such a powerful and unique way, and an effective way. So I just absolutely adore that. Another one that I mentioned before, Mortality. It's not on my top 10, but obviously that's one that sticks out as just being really impactful. Then there's a lot of other books, like science books. I already mentioned science books. There are history books that I like. I think Jill Watts has some excellent books on history, specifically major black figures in history, that I really liked. She's some of my favorite in the last several years. My favorite literary biographies was about Shirley Jackson, but that was another favorite. I could make sure I link to it, but you can find all of my favorites of the last 3 to 4 years. Not to mention my top 10 recommendations every year. You'll find more there. So I make a point to share those because I get really excited to talk about it, and I want people to read these books that are amazing, especially the ones that don't get enough attention. Carl Sagan being a major one, in my opinion. Not enough attention outside of certain circles, I should say. But as always, thank you for watching. Wait, I'm supposed to tag people. The problem is I haven't been involved enough on YouTube to know who hasn't done this before. You know what, let me come back to this because I don't have time to look this up right now, but there are several people I want to mention. Okay, the 3 people I'm tagging: Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, Audrey Approved, and the book Bully. And of course, anyone else who wants to do it too. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you all next time. Let me know what your favorite nonfiction books are and what got you into reading nonfiction, because this actually was a really fun tag to do, and it's very thought-provoking. So thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, and stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.